Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a huge historical event. But we're not just talking about what happened. We're going to look at how we remember it and what that story actually tells us about, well, about our own brains. October 24th, 1929. You know the date. It's etched in history as Black Thursday. This was the day the party stopped, the day the Roaring Twenties just completely fell silent. And out of that chaos, a legend was born. I mean, a truly unforgettable, tragic image. You can picture it, right? Financiers, totally wiped out, taking that one last, desperate leap, right from the top of their glittering empires. But here's the thing. What if that image, the most famous part of the whole story, isn't really true? What if it's a myth? Okay, let's really get into this. We're going to separate that powerful cinematic story from the much more complicated reality. So Section 1, The Legend of Black Thursday. And it really is about that defining image, isn't it? When you hear 1929 crash, that's probably the first thing that pops into your head. It's just so brutal, so visceral. This idea of financiers ruined in a heartbeat, jumping from Wall Street windows. Yeah, this quote really nails it. Written in the sky, a vertical plunge. It's such a powerful metaphor, right? Because it perfectly captured just how sudden and totally devastating the collapse felt. It took something abstract, all these margin calls and ticker tapes that most people don't get, and it turned it into a human tragedy we could feel instantly. All right, part 2, numbers versus narrative. Because as powerful as that image is, some folks, like the economist John Kenneth Galbraith, started pointing out that maybe it's more legend than fact. So let's do something a little different. Let's forget the story for a second and just look at the cold, hard data. Okay, check this out. The data tells a totally different story. Look here. The suicide rate was already on the rise before the crash. And get this, it didn't even peak until 1932, like years later, right in the thick of the Great Depression. And maybe the weirdest part? The rates were actually often higher during the supposedly happy summer months than they were right after the crash. Wild, right? And this table just lays it all out perfectly. This is the heart of what we're talking about today. On one side, you've got the reality, this tangled mess of credit, leverage, and systemic risk. It's confusing, right? It's abstract. But on the other side, you've got a simple, powerful, and totally unforgettable story about human despair.
So why? Why do we remember the myth and not the math? The answer, it turns out, isn't in a history book. It's actually wired right into our brains.
Okay, part 3, your brain on a story. The thing is, our brains didn't evolve to read spreadsheets. No way. They evolved to understand the world through stories. It's a biological thing. So let's look at how our own chemistry forges this incredible connection to a good narrative.
This is so cool. Scientists call it neural coupling. When you're really listening to a story, your brain activity literally starts to mirror the brain of the person telling it. It's like your minds are syncing up. A PowerPoint slide with bullet points just can't do that. It doesn't build that bridge.
And it gets even deeper. Stories don't just make us feel things, they actually change our brain chemistry. When a story has characters we care about going through some kind of conflict, our brain releases oxytocin. You might have heard of it. It's sometimes called the moral molecule. It's what creates trust and empathy. It's the chemical that makes us connect and makes us believe. So, how does it work? It's like a chain reaction. First, you need conflict. A character has to be struggling with something. That builds tension, right? It grabs our attention. And as we get emotionally invested in their struggle, boom, the brain releases that oxytocin. And that's the magic moment. That's when the connection is made. Suddenly, we don't just hear the story, we care about it.
Okay, Section 4, the crash as a Greek tragedy. So we know our brains crave a story. The big question is, what kind of story did the mess of 1929 turn into? Well, it's fascinating. The event was basically packaged into one of the oldest story formats in human history, the hero's journey. Think about it. You start with the normal world. That's the Roaring Twenties, when everyone thought prosperity would last forever. Then you get the call to adventure, with regular folks pouring their life savings into the stock market. October 1929, that's the ordeal, the absolute low point. And what comes after? The transformation, the long, painful start of the Great Depression. See, it turns a financial mess into a classic story of pride coming before a devastating fall.
And of course, you can't have a great story without great characters, right? Well, The Crash had them in spades, turning this big, abstract system failure into a very human drama.
And these archetypes are what make the whole thing feel real. I mean, on one hand, you have the Titan, a guy like Jesse Livermore, the speculator with his fleet of Rolls-Royces. He represents the incredible excess and the ultimate fall. But then you have the everyman, someone like Groucho Marx. He hated gambling, but still lost everything. He makes the crisis personal for all of us. We don't just hear about numbers on a page, we feel the loss. Which brings us to our final section, why the best story wins. And this really gets back to the main point. That myth, the story of the jumpers, even though it wasn't factually true, it communicated the emotional truth of the crash in a way that no bar chart ever could. So why is it so much more powerful? Well, it's because it gives our brains exactly what they're wired to look for. It dramatizes despair. It's a perfect metaphor for that vertical drop. It takes a really complex failure and boils it down to one simple, shocking image. It gives a chaotic, scary event a clear, tragic symbol we can all remember. And this right here shows you the incredible power of storytelling. But it also shows the responsibility that comes with it. The same brain hacks that help us understand complicated things can also be used to oversimplify or worse, to manipulate. It's a really fine line to walk. Which really leads to this key principle. A good story shouldn't distort reality, it should make a complex reality easier to grasp. The goal should never be to just replace facts with a story because it sounds better. The real art is using a story to shine a light on the truth, to make it accessible. It's all about that balance.
So, that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. If a story isn't factually true, but it tells a deeper, emotional truth, what is it worth? Where do you draw the line between a powerful metaphor and a dangerous myth? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this one.